Montana Territory, 1875. The sun beat down on the dusty trail as Benjamin Nolan wiped the sweat from his brow. At 25, he'd already seen enough of the West's cruelty to know that a man survived longer on his own. The sprawling ranch he'd inherited from his uncle stretched before him. 3,000 acres of promise and burden. Land meant responsibility, and responsibility meant vulnerability. Ben had learned early that the frontier took more than it gave, especially from those foolish enough to open their hearts. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and his land, he muttered to the empty air as he surveyed the fence line. It was his personal creed, born from watching his parents' dreams of a better life crumble beneath the harsh Montana sky. They'd died of fever when he was 16, leaving him to fend for himself until his uncle's unexpected bequest last spring. Now he had the Double N Ranch and a future most men would envy, but Ben knew better than to expect happiness. The frontier wasn't built for such luxuries. His herd was growing, the ranch house solid, and his small crew of cowboys loyal. Yet in the quiet evenings, the emptiness of the place pressed in on him like a physical weight. Sometimes he caught himself watching the trail that led into town, as if expecting someone. But Ben would quickly correct himself. Loneliness was safer than loss. Isolation was preferable to the inevitable disappointment that came with caring for others. The sun was dipping low when Ben spotted the broken wagon about a half-mile from his property line. A man stood beside it, hat in hand, examining a shattered wheel. 3 children huddled nearby, 2 boys and a girl, none older than 10. Something in their thin faces and wary postures told Ben they'd seen more than their share of hardship. For a moment, he considered riding past. Other people's troubles weren't his concern. The frontier was merciless to the unprepared, and he'd long since decided that saving others was a fool's errand. But as his horse shifted beneath him, the smallest child looked up and caught his gaze. Might as well see what's happening, Ben muttered to himself, turning his horse toward the stranded family. It wasn't kindness, he told himself, just neighborly duty, nothing more. The man introduced himself as Thomas Wilson, a widowed farmer seeking a new start further west. The children weren't his. They were orphans he'd taken in after a cholera outbreak had claimed their parents in Kansas City. The eldest boy, Michael, stood protectively near his younger brother and sister. Their careful expressions revealed lives already touched by loss. Wheels busted beyond repair, Thomas explained. We were hoping to make it to Riverspend by nightfall. Town's still 15 miles west, Ben replied. You won't make it before dark, especially with a broken wheel. He hesitated, the words sticking in his throat. My ranch is just over that rise. You can stay the night, and I'll help you sort out that will come morning. The relief on Thomas's face made Ben uncomfortable. He didn't want gratitude. He didn't want connection. But as they made their way to the Double N, the youngest boy, barely 6, slipped his small hand into Ben's, looking up with solemn eyes. Thank you, mister, he said quietly. Something shifted inside Ben's chest, a feeling he quickly suppressed. These weren't his problems. These weren't his people. Come tomorrow, they'd be on their way, and he'd return to the solitude he'd convinced himself was preferable to the pain of caring. Little did Benjamin Nolan know that the events set in motion by this simple act of reluctant kindness would challenge everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The following morning, Ben helped Thomas repair the wheel using spare parts from the ranch's storage shed. The 3 orphans, Michael, James, and little Emma, proved surprisingly helpful. They fetched tools, held boards steady, and worked without complaint. Ben found himself impressed by their resilience and unwavering determination despite their young age. You've got good hands, Ben told Michael, who had just handed him exactly the right wrench without being asked. Most grown men can't tell a carriage bolt from a lag screw. The boy straightened with pride. Our pa was a wheelwright back in Kansas City. Before the sickness took him. Ben nodded, understanding the unspoken depth of loss behind those simple words. He'd been older when death claimed his parents, but he recognized the shadow that hung over these children, the same shadow that had driven him to build walls around his heart. By midday, the wagon was repaired. Thomas thanked Ben profusely, offering what little money he had in payment. Keep it, Ben said gruffly. You'll need it where you're going. As he watched the wagon disappear down the trail, those 3 small faces looking back at him until they were out of sight, Ben felt an unexpected hollowness in his chest. He shook it off and returned to his duties. The fence in the north pasture needed mending, and the cattle weren't going to drive themselves to the summer grazing grounds. But the next morning, Ben woke to the sound of wagon wheels approaching. Grabbing his rifle from beside the bed, caution was second nature in these parts. He stepped onto the porch just as a covered wagon pulled into the yard. This one was larger than Thomas's, well appointed with fresh paint and sturdy canvas. The woman driving it pulled the team to a halt with confident hands. When she climbed down, Ben found himself momentarily speechless. She was young, no more than 22, with chestnut hair that caught the morning sunlight. Her dark blue traveling dress was dusty from the trail but well made, suggesting she wasn't destitute. Most striking were her eyes, clear and direct as they assessed both him and the ranch with obvious interest. "Mr. Nolan," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "I understand you're the owner of this ranch." Ben approached cautiously, his rifle lowered but still in hand. "I am. And you are?" "Violet Crawford." She extended a gloved hand with a confidence unusual for a woman alone on the frontier. "I've come about the advertisement." "Advertisement?" A small furrow appeared between her brows. "For the teaching position. At your ranch school." When his confusion didn't clear, she reached into her satchel and produced a newspaper clipping. "This advertisement. For a schoolteacher to instruct the children at the Double N Ranch." The paper clearly showed his ranch name and location, requesting an experienced teacher for immediate employment, promising room, board, and fair wages. But Ben had placed no such advertisement. "Miss Crawford, there must be some mistake. I didn't place this ad. There's no school here, and no children either." Her expression shifted from confusion to embarrassment. "But I was told." The station master in Riverspend confirmed it. "He said just yesterday you helped a man with 3 orphaned children, and that more families with children were settling nearby." Realization dawned on Ben. "Those weren't my children. Just travelers with a broken wagon. They've moved on." Violet's shoulders sagged slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "I see. Well, this is rather awkward. I've come all the way from Denver." "Denver? That's nearly 500 miles. 527, to be precise," she said with a rueful smile. "I was teaching at a ladies' seminary there, but when I saw this advertisement..." She trailed off, looking around the ranch with obvious disappointment. "I suppose I was eager for an adventure. Teaching refined young ladies proper penmanship wasn't exactly fulfilling my frontier dreams." Despite himself, Ben was intrigued. "You came all this way, alone, based on a newspaper advertisement?" "Not entirely alone. I traveled with a merchant caravan until Riverspend." She gestured to her wagon. "And I came prepared. Books, slates, maps, everything needed for a proper schoolroom." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the morning birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. Ben knew he should send her on her way. A woman like Violet Crawford, educated, refined, and clearly accustomed to civilization, had no place on his isolated ranch. Yet something in her determined expression made him hesitate. "You must be hungry after your journey. Least I can do is offer you breakfast before you head back to town." Over coffee and biscuits, Violet revealed more of her story. She was 22, orphaned at 16 when influenza took both parents within a week of each other. With no siblings and distant relatives unwilling to take her in, she'd used her education to secure a teaching position. "But I always felt drawn to the West," she admitted. "My father used to read me stories of frontier life. He promised we'd see it together someday." Ben recognized the familiar ache of interrupted dreams. "Plans don't always work out the way we expect out here." "No," she agreed, meeting his gaze directly. "But that doesn't mean we stop making them." Something about her quiet confidence unsettled him. She represented everything he'd convinced himself to avoid: hope, connection, the risk of caring about someone who could be snatched away by the frontier's cruel hand. As she prepared to leave, a commotion at the edge of the property caught their attention. Another wagon was approaching, this one filled with a family, parents and 4 children. Behind them came 2 more wagons, each carrying families with young ones. The lead wagon stopped, and a broad-shouldered man approached. "Mr. Nolan?" "Name's Edward Miller. We heard you were starting a school on your property for the children in these parts. Been waiting for something like this so we could settle permanently." Ben stared in disbelief as 2 more families introduced themselves, the Petersons with their 3 boys, and the Johnsons with twin girls. All had recently arrived in the territory, all had heard about a school at the Double N Ranch, and all were prepared to build homesteads nearby if their children could receive an education. "There's been a misunderstanding," Ben began, but stopped when he saw Violet's expression, a mixture of surprise and growing determination. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "or perhaps an opportunity." The families looked between them, confusion evident. Ben pulled Violet aside. "I don't know what's happening here, but I never planned for this. I'm a cattle rancher, not a community builder. I've got no interest in having families settling around my property." "Why not?" she challenged. "More settlers means more protection from outlaws, more hands during emergencies, more opportunity for trade. Isn't that how the West is meant to be tamed? Through community." "The West isn't meant to be tamed," Ben retorted. "It takes more than it gives. These families don't know what they're walking into. They know exactly what they're choosing," Violet countered. "They're choosing possibility over fear. I'd think a man brave enough to build a ranch in this territory would understand that." Her words struck him like a physical blow. Was it bravery that had built his ranch, or was it simply another fortress to protect him from human connection? Before he could respond, a final wagon appeared on the horizon. As it drew closer, Ben recognized Thomas Wilson at the reins, with the 3 orphans beside him. "Mr. Nolan," called little Emma, waving excitedly. "We've come back. Mr. Thomas says we might get to stay near your ranch and go to school." Thomas approached with an apologetic smile. "The children couldn't stop talking about your kindness. When we reached town and heard about the school you were starting, well, I've been offered work at the sawmill in Riversbend. If the children could get an education nearby." Ben looked at the hopeful faces surrounding him. Families seeking a future, children needing stability, and Violet Crawford watching him with those clear, challenging eyes. Everything in him wanted to retreat, to reaffirm the solitary existence he'd convinced himself was safer. But for the first time, that existence suddenly seemed hollow rather than secure. "There's an old bunkhouse on the north side of the property," he found himself saying. "Might make a decent schoolhouse with some work." The look of pure joy that transformed Violet's face pierced through defenses Ben hadn't even realized were crumbling. Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch became a center of activity unlike anything Ben had ever experienced. The families worked together to convert the abandoned bunkhouse into a proper schoolroom while establishing their own homesteads on neighboring land. Ben initially kept his distance, focusing on ranch work and telling himself this arrangement was temporary, a concession he'd soon regret. But each evening, Violet would appear at his door with questions about water access, or lumber sources, or the history of the area for her lessons. She'd taken a room at the Johnsons' homestead but spent her days at the makeshift school, preparing for the dozen children who would soon be her pupils. Her enthusiasm was contagious, her practical approach to challenges impressive. "You're good with them," Ben observed one afternoon, finding himself drawn to the schoolhouse where Violet was already organizing books and hanging maps. "The children, I mean. Children are resilient," she replied, pushing a strand of hair back from her face. "They've already faced more hardship than most adults back east could imagine, yet they still find joy in learning. It's humbling." "My parents wanted to start a school," Ben admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Before the fever took them, they believed education was the key to taming the frontier." Violet studied him thoughtfully. "You miss them still." It wasn't a question. For once, Ben didn't deflect. "Every day." "And that's why you keep everyone at a distance?" "Because caring about people means risking loss." Her directness should have angered him, but instead, it felt like a weight lifting. "The frontier is no place for attachments. Everything here is temporary." "Is it?" Violet gestured to the schoolroom, taking shape around them. "This doesn't look temporary to me. It looks like people building something to last." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Ben allowed himself to see the possibility in what was happening. Not just a school, but a community forming around his isolated ranch. A future different from the solitary existence he'd resigned himself to. The moment broke when Michael, the eldest orphan, burst into the room. "Miss Crawford, Mr. Nolan, riders coming from the east, lot of them." Ben's hand instinctively went to his gun. A large group of riders meant potential trouble. "Get the children inside," he ordered, moving quickly to the door. 10 riders approached, their manner suggesting they weren't simple travelers. Ben recognized their leader immediately, Curtis Hawkins, a notorious land speculator known for forcing settlers off valuable property through intimidation and violence. Well, Hawkins called as they pulled to a stop. Heard there was quite the settlement springing up around the Double N. Didn't believe it until now. What do you want, Hawkins? Ben positioned himself between the riders and the schoolhouse where Violet had gathered the children. Just being neighborly, Hawkins replied with a cold smile. This territory's changing. Railroad's coming through just 20 miles south. Land values are about to soar. His eyes narrowed. Smart man would sell now, before complications arise. Not interested. No. Hawkins glanced at the homesteads taking shape. Shame. Especially since I've acquired mineral rights to most of the surrounding parcels. Would be unfortunate if access to water suddenly became restricted. Ben felt a presence beside him and found Violet standing there, her chin raised defiantly. These families have legal claims to their land, Mr. Hawkins. And the Double N Ranch has historical water rights that predate any mineral claims. Hawkins' expression darkened. And who might you be, miss? Violet Crawford, the schoolteacher. A cruel laugh rippled through the riders. A schoolteacher? In this wilderness? Nolan must be more sentimental than I thought. Hawkins leaned forward in his saddle. Listen carefully. This territory isn't meant for schoolmarms and children. It's for men who understand power. I'm offering fair value now. Next time, I won't be so generous. There won't be a next time, Ben stated firmly. This land isn't for sale. Neither is theirs. As the riders departed with thinly veiled threats, Ben noticed the families had gathered, watching anxiously. In their faces, he saw fear, but also determination. They'll be back, Thomas Wilson said quietly. Yes, Ben agreed. They will. That night, Ben found Violet sitting alone on the porch of the schoolhouse, staring at the stars. Without invitation, he sat beside her. You should leave, he said bluntly. Take the children and the families with you. Hawkins is dangerous. What's happening here? This community, this school, it's exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed on the frontier. Is that what happened to your parents? She asked softly. They tried to build something meaningful, and the frontier took them? Ben's silence was answer enough. I'm sorry for your loss, Violet continued. Truly. But retreating into isolation hasn't protected you from pain, has it? It's only prevented joy. The truth of her words struck him with unexpected force. His carefully constructed solitude suddenly seemed not like protection, but like a prison of his own making. I came west seeking purpose, Violet said. These families came seeking opportunity. Those children need stability. Are we all fools for wanting these things? No, Ben admitted. But wanting doesn't make something possible. Neither does fear make something impossible. She turned to face him fully. The frontier is harsh, yes. But humans survive through community, not isolation. That's the lesson of the West. Not that we should avoid attachment, but that we need each other to endure its challenges. In the silver moonlight, her conviction was almost tangible. For the first time in years, Ben allowed himself to imagine a different future, one filled with voices, laughter, shared burdens. One where the Double N Ranch became not just his fortress, but the heart of something larger. If we stay, he said slowly, Hawkins will make trouble. Real trouble. Violet's smile was determined. Then we'll face it together. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. The schoolhouse was completed, lessons began, and the homesteaders established a routine of mutual support. Ben found himself drawn increasingly into the community's life, advising on agriculture, helping with building projects, and even occasionally sitting in during Violet's lessons. He watched with growing admiration as she transformed the raw bunkhouse into a place of learning and discovery. Children who had known only hardship blossomed under her guidance. Even Ben's cowboys began attending evening classes where Violet taught reading and mathematics to adults who'd never had formal education. One evening, as they walked back from the schoolhouse together, Violet linked her arm through his with a naturalness that both startled and pleased him. You know, she said, for a man determined to remain uninvolved, you've become quite essential to this community. I'm just doing what needs doing, he demurred. Exactly. Her smile held a warmth that reached beyond his carefully constructed defenses. That's what community is, people doing what needs doing for each other. Before he could respond, Thomas Wilson approached at a run. Ben, riders coming from the south. Looks like Hawkins and his men. More than before. Ben immediately shifted into action. Get the women and children to the ranch house. Men with rifles, spread out along the property line. As Violet hurried to gather the children, Ben caught her arm. Stay inside. No matter what happens. Be careful, she replied, her eyes conveying far more than her words. This time, Hawkins brought 20 men. They carried torches and weapons, their intentions clear even before Hawkins called out his demands. Last chance, Nolan. Sign over the double N and tell these squatters to clear out by morning, or we burn you out. Ben stood firm, surrounded by the homesteading men and his ranch hands. This land is legally claimed. All of it. We have the paperwork to prove it. Paperwork burns, Hawkins snarled. Men with proper motivation can make documents disappear. The railroad's paying top dollar, and I aim to deliver this valley cleared and ready. The railroad? This was new information. What railroad? Hawkins realized he'd revealed too much. Doesn't matter. What matters is you're sitting on land worth a fortune, and I mean to have it. The standoff intensified as Hawkins' men spread out, clearly preparing for violence. Ben knew his group was outnumbered, though not by much. If shooting started, lives would be lost on both sides. Just then, Violet emerged from the ranch house, carrying something in her hands. Despite Ben's frantic gesture for her to get back inside, she walked steadily toward the confrontation. Mr. Hawkins, she called, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. Perhaps you should examine these before you make a terrible mistake. She held out a packet of documents. After a moment's hesitation, Hawkins snatched them from her hand. As he read, his expression changed from contempt to confusion to barely concealed rage. This is impossible, he growled. What is it? Demanded one of his men. Violet answered calmly. Those are official documents from the Territorial Land Office, dated yesterday. My father was Jonathan Crawford, senior legal counsel for the Western Pacific Railroad before his death. These papers confirm that the proposed railroad route has been officially redrawn to pass 30 miles north of here, through land already secured by the company. She turned to address not just Hawkins, but all the men with him. The Western Pacific has no interest in this valley. Never did. Mr. Hawkins has been deceiving you, gentlemen. There's no fortune to be made here, just honest ranching and farming. Murmurs spread through Hawkins' men. Several lowered their weapons, looking uncertainly at their leader. She's lying, Hawkins snapped, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Am I? Violet produced another document. This telegram arrived this morning from the territorial governor. It seems he's particularly interested in reports of intimidation against legal homesteaders. The marshal will be visiting tomorrow to investigate. The balance of power shifted visibly. Several of Hawkins' men were already backing their horses away, unwilling to risk prison for a scheme that appeared to be collapsing. This isn't over, Hawkins snarled, but even he recognized his position had become untenable. With a final venomous glare, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, followed by his increasingly demoralized men. As the danger receded, Ben turned to Violet in astonishment. How did you? Were those documents real? Her smile was part mischief, part triumph. The telegram is genuine. I sent it myself 3 days ago when I rode into town, describing Hawkins' threats to the governor. The land office papers? Well, let's just say I learned calligraphy at that lady's seminary in Denver. For a moment, Ben could only stare at her in wonder. Then, to the surprise of everyone, including himself, he laughed. It was a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to release years of carefully guarded emotion. Violet Crawford, he said when he could speak again, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Later that night, after the celebration had died down and the community had dispersed to their homes, Ben and Violet sat alone on his porch. The stars seemed especially brilliant, as if celebrating their victory. You know Hawkins might come back, Ben said. Men like him don't give up easily. Perhaps, Violet agreed. But neither do we. And the telegram wasn't entirely a bluff. I really did write to the governor. The marshal is coming to investigate. Ben shook his head in amazement. I've spent years believing the only way to survive out here was to stand alone, to avoid connections that could be taken away. And now, she prompted gently, now I'm beginning to think I was wrong. What happened today? We prevailed because we stood together, because you were brave enough to come west seeking purpose. because those families were determined to build something lasting. He turned to her, finally allowing himself to fully see the woman who had walked into his life and upended every certainty. The frontier is harsh, but it doesn't have to be faced alone. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't. In the silver moonlight, Ben reached for her hand. When their fingers intertwined, it felt not like vulnerability, but like strength, a different kind of strength than he had known before, but more enduring. Miss Crawford, he said formally, though his voice held a warmth that belied the formality. I find myself in need of a schoolteacher. Permanently. Would you consider staying on at the Double N? Her smile illuminated the night. I believe I would, Mr. Nolan. On one condition. What's that? That you promise to attend some lessons yourself. I think you have much still to learn about building rather than surviving. As summer turned to autumn, the small community around the Double N ranch flourished. The schoolhouse expanded to accommodate more children from neighboring homesteads. Ben donated land for a proper town site, where a general store and small church now stood. Violet's reputation as a teacher grew throughout the territory, bringing more families seeking opportunity and education for their children. Thomas Wilson and the 3 orphans built a comfortable home on land adjacent to the ranch. The children thrived under Violet's teaching, with Michael showing particular aptitude for engineering and mathematics. Little Emma became Violet's informal assistant, her gentle nature helping younger children adjust to school life. One crisp October morning, Ben stood on the hilltop overlooking what was now informally called Nolan Valley. Fields of wheat glowed golden in the sunrise, cattle grazed on the upper pastures, and smoke rose from the chimneys of nearly 20 homesteads. In the center, the schoolhouse bell rang, calling children to their lessons. He felt rather than heard Violet approach. After 6 months of courtship, he knew her presence by instinct. It's beautiful, she said, slipping her hand into his. Even more than I imagined when I read those stories as a girl. It's not what I imagined either, Ben admitted. It's better. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the valley come to life below them. Benjamin Nolan, who had once believed the frontier was no place for attachment, now found himself bound to this land and these people by something stronger than ownership, by community, purpose, and love. I received a letter yesterday, Violet said, leaning against his shoulder. From the Territorial Education Board. They're offering grants for established schools in frontier communities. We could build something larger, proper, maybe even at a library. Always planning for the future, Ben said with affection. Someone needs to, she teased. You were content with just surviving until I arrived. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. At 25, Benjamin Nolan had believed he understood the frontier's harsh lessons. At 26, he had learned a different truth, that what made the West brutal was not its demands, but its possibilities, the constant choice between retreat and growth, between isolation and connection. Violet Crawford, he said, his voice steady with certainty, I was surviving before you came. But I wasn't living. You showed me that the frontier isn't just a place to endure, it's a place to build, to create, to love. He dropped to one knee, producing a simple gold ring from his pocket. Will you help me build that future? Will you marry me? Her eyes filled with tears as she pulled him to his feet. Benjamin Nolan, I came west seeking purpose and adventure. I found both, and something I wasn't looking for, but needed more, a partner worthy of both. Yes, I will marry you. As their lips met, the schoolhouse bell rang again in the distance, a sound that had come to represent not just education, but the heart of the community they had built together. What had begun with 3 orphans helping a wealthy rancher fix his wagon, had transformed into something neither could have imagined, a future built on the foundation of mutual strength rather than solitary endurance. 2 months later, on a bright December morning with snow dusting the distant mountains, Benjamin and Violet were married in the small church beside the schoolhouse. The community gathered to celebrate. Thomas and the orphans, the homesteading families, Ben's ranch hands, and even the territorial governor, who had been so impressed by Violet's initiative that he'd appointed her to the Education Council. As they exchanged vows, Ben looked into the eyes of the woman who had challenged his most fundamental beliefs about survival on the frontier. He had once thought the West too harsh for love, too unpredictable for permanent bonds. Now he understood that those bonds were not weaknesses but the very foundation of true strength. the ability to face life's challenges together, to build rather than merely endure. "I promise to be your partner in all things," he vowed. "To build with you, to learn with you, to face whatever comes not alone, but together." Violet's answering smile held all the warmth and determination that had first captured his heart. "And I promise to remind you, whenever you forget, that the frontier's greatest gift is not the land it offers, but the communities it forges. Our community, our future." As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Benjamin Nolan finally understood what his parents had known all along, that the true taming of the West would come not through isolation, but through connection, not through fortresses, but through schools and churches, farms and ranches, built by people who chose to face the frontier's challenges together. The broken wagon wheel that had brought 3 orphans to his door had set in motion more than just a community. It had mended something broken in himself, the belief that love had no place on the frontier. In Violet's eyes, in the thriving valley before them, and in the promise of their shared future, Ben found the truth he'd been hiding from. That even in the wildest places, perhaps especially there, the human heart's greatest strength was its capacity to love.